I'm not convinced the state's there for our well-being.
Yeah.
Certainly because they don't share the same values.
Right.
But of control, the last largest episode that we had was 9/11, and the constitutional rights that were so easily revoked, and the Patriot Act and these various things, the way airports are now, that was never rolled back. And so there's concerns that it's not like when the state gets an opportunity to seize power and surveillance, control things, medically monitor you, that out of a time of crisis, when people so reluctantly, non-reluctant, give up, what should I say, easily give up their rights because of fear. It's not like the state, after they get out of crisis, goes, okay, let's return back to normal. So we could expect that it's going to continue like this. Don't despair, though. Again, the city of God, right, versus the city of man. The city of man will not triumph over the city of God. And the Bill Gates of hell will not triumph over the church.
All right, thank you, Father. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Blessings, brother. Don't despair, though. Again, the city of God, right, versus the city of man. The city of man will not triumph over the city of God. The city of man will not triumph.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good to see all of you on this Wednesday evening, feast day of St. Catherine. I hope all of you are well. And yeah, let's do a stream. What say you? Scientism, politics, and Gnostic technology. I'll tell you a little bit, kind of a background. Welcome, welcome. Good to see all of you. Why I actually, what precipitated this? Several things. And it's just kind of interesting how oftentimes knowledge and discoveries are actually made through what oftentimes might appear as disparate facts, events that all of a sudden kind of coalesce. So obviously I've been thinking a lot about, given the elections, politics, the various frustrations with the media that, or should I say, the Soviet Pravda media. I'd say maybe this even started before with issues, even dating back, the last couple years of the climate change push, veganism, sustainability, social moral issues. And what I began to see is kind of one voice, like the media, all the media was saying one thing. Corporations, academia, Hollywood, the music industry, the bankers, the corporate America, the tech companies. For me, this became quite disturbing to hear kind of one narrative. There was no dissent. It caught me, especially the appeals to science. A kind of new age, new society, new economics, all these sorts of things. Kind of one world, global citizenry. That's probably where it kind of began, where I began to reflect on people's use of science, that terminology. Obviously, we then got the Coofid and everything that has happened throughout that with regards to quote-unquote the experts, but not just the experts, but the exact same thing. The state, the governors, the tech companies, the media, academia, all these, the Fortune 500, the bankers, the WHO, the UN, the World Economic Forum, all giving the same story and appealing to science. Are we going to listen to science? We're going to follow science. We need to obey science. So again, a thing came up with regards to the Coofid and then the restrictions that were applied through state mandates started to get me to caused me to start to kind of reflect again on the issue of science, politics, and then obviously to see the same sort of thing kind of happen within the elections with the media. And then a couple other things. As many of you might know, I will be teaching 2 classes this spring semester. One's going to be an ethics class here. However, the other one's going to be a political philosophy class. And that class isn't just going to be a general, it wasn't designed, I mean, as far as it was given to me, wasn't designed to simply be a purview of kind of all of political philosophy from antiquity onwards, but specifically modern and contemporary political philosophy, or the foundations thereof, so like 18th, 19th, 20th century political philosophy. And I had to spend some time kind of thinking through, well, what text would I like to use, and what themes do I want running through that course. And so I remember studying in grad school, particularly actually in master's, when I was doing my master's, Eric Voeglin. And I went through and started looking some backups, some of Eric Voeglin's works, and found some texts. And we'll talk a little bit about this tonight. One of the texts, and I think it's an easy read, it's a short read that I recommend to everybody. Science, Politics, and Gnosticism. Okay, that's only 87 pages. And that's going to accompany in the class also Voeglin's scholar Dante Germano, Machiavelli to Marx, Modern Western Political Thought. Also, I'll be pulling from, let's see, let me just get an article up here. By the way, is the sound okay, guys? Just 1 second. Augusto Del Noce, Leo Strauss, let me just open this document real quick. Carlo Lazzolezzi, who actually has an article, Augusto Del Noce, on the new totalitarianism. Also, if you think back, so I'm just kind of, giving you the history of like what I'm about to talk about, the different kind of thoughts that kind of came together. You also might remember that a couple years ago, I delivered a paper at the IOTA conference in Iași, Romania, on the dangers of technology, in which I made an assessment going through the creation of modernity through Enlightenment periods, what was distinct about that type of philosophic project, and the consequences of those philosophic projects that inevitably led to what is called technocracy. That has always been kind of running in the back of my mind, given, again, everything that I'd said with what's been going on recently, as far as this kind of monopolization, let's call it an ideological monopolization. I've also become quite concerned, particularly among Orthodox, in their amidst the Coofid, their appeals to science. Obviously, we're going to talk about the nature of science. I'm not saying to be anti-science or anything like that. But the sort of kind of attitude in which people began to talk to other people about Coofid and the restrictions, by appealing to science, the ways that they appeal to it, that I thought was problematic, that was in my mind too. And obviously, as we get new kind of lockdowns and restrictions, it causes me to reassess. And in light of reading Voeglin's work, it all kind of came together. And I remember just recently having a conversation. I had called Dr. Bruce Seraphim Fultz, who also has written papers on Eric Voeglin, and expressed some of these kind of ideas of... Now, Voeglin doesn't talk about it. Other authors do. You'll find this in Carlo Lancelotti's article, and as well as Dr. Bruce Fultz, who is quite good at speaking about the dangers of technology. But as I read through, even though Eric Voeglin didn't identify technocracy in what we're going to actually talk about, Gnosticism, he identifies several political and philosophical positions that he says is Gnostic. We'll talk a little bit about the old features of Gnosticism that reoccur. He particularly points them out and pays attention to socialism, Marxism, and National Socialism, not limited to, but, and also particular philosophers, Comte, positivism, Heidegger, Nietzsche, Marx, is being thoroughly Gnostic. And we'll talk about in a little bit what kind of essential features of Gnosticism that he's talking about that have reemerged and created certain paradigms that infect politics and the socio-political structures that actually make science impossible. In the same way that people cited science in the regimes, the political regimes that I just mentioned, I'm starting to notice that people are doing the exact same thing. And Voeglin's going to talk about, once you have that kind of change, then you move into a Gnostic system in which certain questions are no longer able to be asked. It's not that they're even just suppressed. The system makes it so you can't ask those questions. And it uses science, under the auspice of science, but divorced from its actual grounds. And its misuse, its misunderstanding, it becomes a non-science, paraded as science. And as I'm going to talk, it becomes a religion. It becomes scientism, and this is what I'm fundamentally concerned with. Now, as I read through this, I realized that all of this applies to technocracy. This is what we're living in now. So I just kind of put some of these thoughts together. I think this will be actually a great course as we study some of the classic political philosophers, again, from Machiavelli to Marx. It even goes into the Protestant Reformation and these kinds of ideologies. Hobbes, Rousseau, Mill, Spencer, Hegel, Fourier, Marx. Who am I leaving out? John Calvin, Martin Luther. And that this is the foundations for what we're living in now that can explain that. And what's the theme? The theme of this course is going to be the new politics, the new way, the new man, the new society, the new world order, the new Gnosticism. So I think that's going to be a great course. Also, thinking about this, I just kind of sat down last night for a couple hours and I kind of wrote out my thoughts, kind of trying to connect all these things. And of course, I'll write more, but I thought that I would share my thoughts with you on this topic. And then we can open up for Q&A. We can open up for, by the way, super chats there. Feel free to, don't forget. Oh, okay, thank you. You already got me in there. I don't need to put it. Like, subscribe, if you like. Okay, without further ado, so let me just provide kind of my critique and explanation of all the various things, again, that I've seen going on. And like I said, this really began with this kind of push, the climate change, science. All scientists agree, don't question the science. To meat is bad and evil. We need to now be vegans. We need to stop. We're overpopulated. The world's overpopulated. We need population control. We need multiculturalism. We need a breakdown of all nation states and one people, one culture, one religion, one economics. In fact, no money, no private property, a utopianism, which then, again, the Coofid, and all under the guise of, remember, don't be selfish, love your neighbor. Now, let me just say, I'm not saying that there isn't such a thing as Coofid. It is real, but I'm just going to take a critical and intelligent analysis of what's being said, the data and the appeals to science, and we're going to talk about how science works. Again, most of the people screaming, listen to the science and trust the experts, are not experts themselves. And even those qualified as PhDs in science may know how to do the science, but they don't understand the philosophy of science, the structures, the epistemology, whether it has any ontological relation to the world. How do scientific paradigms change? What is evidence? All these various things the scientist doesn't actually consider. I'd like to consider that. Again, Coofid is real, but we need, and people have died, people have gotten sick, but we need to be critical about this. We need to be intelligent, and we need to situate this issue within the historic context of certain philosophical paradigms and politics and the very nature of man and epistemology. I think we're called to do that. So that's where my critique really lies. And what is it? My critique's a critique of religion. It's a critique about the corruption of philosophy into philodoxy. Remember, philosophy, love of wisdom, can be corrupted, and we see this in history. Eric Voeglin talks about it. But the love of wisdom can become the love of doxa, opinion. And that can radically transform the political and social framework in which science exists and is understood. And within this new social, political paradigmatic order, science can become something different than science. And we see this, I believe, what's going on right now. Science becomes a religion. What do we call this new religion? Scientism. It's science-dolatry. And this even applies to Christians. I've seen it all over the place. They treat science as an idol. They don't understand it. They don't understand the structures and the philosophy of science. But they don't need to. Not from their point of view. Why? Because it's something that's been absolutized. It cannot be questioned. Where instead of the high priests and the hierarchy of the church, the high priests are the scientific experts, the technocratic elites, and the devotees and the worshipers are those who follow and participate in such Gnostic structures of the totalitarian terror of technocracy. So that's kind of my intro. Let us begin. Put your seatbelts on. Let us begin. Sweet. Voeglin states, quote, in this book here, "Today, under the pressure of totalitarian terror, we are perhaps inclined to think primarily of physical forms of opposition, but they're not the most successful. The opposition becomes radical and dangerous only when philosophical question itself is called into question, when doxa, opinion, takes on the appearance of philosophy, when it arrogates itself to the name of science and prohibits science as non-science." Science, Politics, and Gnosticism, page 15 of Eric Voeglin's work. Yes, we've entered into a new age based on old, reoccurring Gnostic themes. A sign of this, as Voeglin points out, is the phenomenon occurring, again, as I said, with the climate change and COVID cult communities and their cult members. The COVID cult members. Like I said, even years ago, I realized there was something quasi-religious in nature about the way that people interacted and proselytized and worshipped these things. And here we find, again, the worshiping, the absolutizing of science. What do I mean by that? Well, the empirical sciences historically have been in a certain order compared to all the other disciplines. And it doesn't mean that the empirical sciences, when we study the history of thought, that it is the queen of sciences. And as we'll talk later tonight, nowhere even close. So when you have the other disciplines like philosophy that are intended to be more objective and certain, or let me say foundational, when those disciplines, philosophy, epistemology, ontology, and metaphysics, are replaced or even abolished and then replaced with science, you have the absolutizing of science. An elevation, again, of the technical experts to the infallible magisterium of the new universal religion for all mankind, and the suppression, if not complete abolition, of all questioning and critical analysis of their project and the new Gnostic religion. There has, as Voeglin explains, quote, emerged a phenomenon unknown to antiquity, that permeates our modern society so completely that its ubiquity scarcely leaves us any room to see it at all. Prohibition of questioning, end quote. Voeglin identifies this Gnostic project. And in the book, he's going to give several essential features of Gnosticism. But for tonight, this is one of the most pertinent ones that I'd like to focus on. And he identifies the Gnostic project and speculation. Speculation is opposed to philosophy. And he identifies that to exist, like I said in this book, he mentions, those exist in the political paradigms of socialism, Marxism, and National Socialism. However, the conscious, the deliberate, and painstakingly elaborate abstraction of logos is not limited to those paradigms alone. As I said before, we hear the same demons crying, and the cries come out, those same demonic cries, from the climate change and COVID science idolaters who participate in the beast system of technocracy. And that's exactly what it is. All of these new Gnostic paradigms emerge and occur within modernity as a result of the Enlightenment's secular humanism project that purposely sought to divorce the transcendent ground of being from the intelligible order of being, replacing wisdom, which Lonergan rightly points out, is uniquely associated with God. God is wisdom. And when we replace or sever that transcendent ground, wisdom, from the intelligible order of creation and being, we're left with autonomous speculation. And you know that I've talked a lot about this. Man's pretended autonomy, autonomous epistemology. It all begins, here. When you sever that transcendent ground of being from the intelligible order, you remove the wisdom. And if there's not wisdom, there's doxa. And you have speculation, again, as opposed to the love of wisdom, philosophy. As Voeglin explains, quote, the purpose of this speculation is to shut off the process of being from the transcendent being and have man create himself, end quote. You'll find that on page 18. This Nietzschean death of God, the removal of God from every aspect of human life, man establishes himself. What does he establish? He establishes and erects the secular image of man without the imago Dei, without the image of God, in place of God, in order that he may prove the Pythagorean dictum, quote, of all things the measure is man, of the things that are, that they are, and of the things that are not, that they are not, end quote. And as Nietzsche asks, once this is done, quote, how shall we, murderers of all murderers, console ourselves? That which was the holiest and mightiest of all, that the world has yet possessed, has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe away this blood off of us? With what water could we purify ourselves? What festival's atonement, what sacred games shall we need to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods, simply to be worthy of it? End quote. Now, many of you might be familiar, that is Nietzsche's famous God is Dead from the gay science. And Nietzsche's answer to that, what must we do? Must we not become gods ourselves to simply be worthy of the death of God? Us murderers of all murders. And Nietzsche's answer to the question is, yes, we must become God. We must embrace libido dominandi and will to power. Man, emboldened by such power and perceived freedom now, from the tyranny of God and religion. And by shutting off the process of being from the transcendent ground of being, man believes now he's free to create the world in his own image, according to man's own ideas. So what Voeglin talks about is no longer philosophy, it's speculation, and it's Gnostic, the feature of Gnosticism. And this rebellious project results in a set of ideologies, as we see in history played out, and demoralized practices that views all of nature, including man himself, without any really objective meaning. And therefore, man now understands all things in nature to be something entirely malleable according to one's own personal choices. The will to power, the will to dominate. This produced, historically speaking, the morally barren landscape that is obviously perfectly ripe for growing tyranny. The secular humanist project coming out of the Enlightenment, and with it the complete demoralization of morality and the replacement of truth and canonical morality with power. That's what gave rise to the radical cultural changes of our contemporary nihilistic postmodern era in which we live in. And this cultural transformation, and with it the attempt to destroy and collapse Christendom, initiated by the Enlightenment, is, as Tristan Engelhardt, the late Tristan Engelhardt, explains, quote, the modern secular state, with a secular moral authority secured by reason through supposedly philosophical arguments, that could be recognized by all persons as conclusive. And we're going to, end quote, we're going to return to this again, the use of supposed reason and philosophy that all, the global world, the universal man, the universal religion, and initiating such changes provided the secular state after this with the supposed canonical moral authority as the new universal religion. The Enlightenment thinkers really believed this. And we've gone even further into this. And as the new universal religion to rule its citizenry, that supposedly gave them justification for their canonical account of secular constitutionalism. However, the destruction of tradition in Christendom did not end with ushering in of this new secular polis and constitution. In fact, in his New Atlantis, Bacon states, and he conceived of, quote, a new social order dedicated to the expansion of modern science and progress in human achievement through dominion over nature, libido dominandi, end quote. Recently, the political power of the secular state, however, which attempts to maintain a canonical morality over a relativistic and nihilistic culture that embraces a plurality of moralities, a plurality of cultures, a plurality of religions that has resulted from the death of God, has been exchanged with a new Atlantis. Political institutions, as John Gunnell points out, have begun to be replaced, quote, by a parliament of technical experts. This elite class, end quote, that's from his article, The Technocratic Image, page 394. This elite class of technical experts have come to be called technocrats. I can give you just a brief, let me get a note here. A brief history on the term technocracy. It originated actually in the United States in 1919 by an engineer named William Smith, and first became common when it was adopted by a movement that developed in the early 1930s as a response to the Great Depression. That movement, which for a time gained considerable notoriety and substantial following began with a group of technicians and engineers dedicated to social reform, whose concepts were modeled on the technological republic of Edward Bellamy's late 19th century utopian novel, Looking Backward. Did I tell you? You're going to see more of this utopianism, progressivism in these themes. They were also influenced by the economic theories of Thorstein Veblen's and the principles of scientific management growing out of the work of Frederick W. Taylor, both of which suggested, much like the latter work of James Burnham in the Managerial Society, that politicians and industrial entrepreneurs should and would give way to technical elites. Also, you get some of this in Henri de Saint-Simon's in his vision of the industrial society, where an elite class of engineers, scientists, industrialists, and planners systematically apply technical knowledge to the solution of social problems and the creation of a rational social order, a new world order. Okay, so that's just a little side note, kind of on the history of the creation of the term technocracy and what some of their thoughts were back then. And obviously it's going to emerge as we get tech companies and science, the sort of science that we see today, that it still adopts that, but kind of takes on to become something more than just that. And that is, so again, the technocratic image now replaces the politician and provides mankind with a vision of an industrial society, again, where an elite class of scientists and engineers, industrialists, plan to systematically apply their technical knowledge to a solution of social problems and the creation of a rational social order. So we have to have a problem, right? That you see, that you frame. Climate crisis. Okay. Health crisis. Overpopulation. Independent nation states. All these different things. And what do we see? We see the usual suspects all arise. The WHO, the UN, all the tech companies, the bankers, the international bankers, the Fortune 500, all of these people speak in one voice, providing one type of solution based on science, technical knowledge. Trust the experts. This is how we do it. And notice, we're not even listening to the statesmen, right? What did I say? Technocracy replaces. Statesmen are inefficient. We all know that. The state is slow and dumb. So who do they appeal to? The Dr. Fauci's, the Bill Gates, the technical experts. Okay. To do what? Cure all disease. To bring us into one culture, one religion, one economy, and to stop overpopulation. Again, a solution, a technical solution to a social problem that's rational, scientific. New forms of communication. They've been exchanged for the natural ones. Common culture, nations, identity, even personhood have all been proposed to be eradicated in the name of progress. Technology is now being used, so we're told, and we can see, is the sole means of perfecting the human experience, but without a grounding in the living God as the unconditioned grounds of being. Since these technocrats, they don't share an orthodox belief in the Christian ethos, like Christological anthropology, or any of our values, or the transcendent ground of being. Their idea of the perfection of the human experience lies within the Gnostic technocratic projects, particularly of artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and the new socioeconomic political order. All we have to do is see recently Karl Schwab's The Great Reset, World Economic Forum, as if this stuff wasn't present before in many of the geopolitical writers, where under the banner of science, a new system is built. Crises are taken advantage of and solved in a new way. A new system is built in which certain realities, though, will no longer exist. Certain questions can no longer be asked, and the system itself cannot be critiqued simply because the system has made such things conceptually and practically impossible. All of this is constructed in the name of progress, the betterment of humanity, world peace, sustainability, freedom, democracy, the will of the people, and science. Now, when you start to go through this and analyze this and read what they're saying and historically situate it within these Gnostic ideas, you will see why progressivism, leftism, socialism, Marxism, National Socialism, technocracy, etc., all of those are incompatible with Christianity, philosophy, and true science. I don't know why this hasn't struck people before, but if you think about it, all the most evil people in the world, what would you say? Hollywood actors, okay, the porn industry, the bankers, okay. Now, you have the music industry, the media, liberal academia. They're all one political ideology. They're all saying the same thing. If I were you and I was Christian, I would think, hold on a minute, there's something strange if my voting and my beliefs are matching up with literally the most evil people and systems in the world. Why that hasn't occurred to some Christians is, I was about ready to say, beyond me, but what? Because the system has been constructed such that it's conceptually impossible and practically impossible to critique it and question it, to see it. You're in the matrix. And these Gnostic systems, gnosis, as Eric Voeglin defines it, desiring dominion over being and truth. And those Gnostic systems that I speak of, they've been inherited from modernity. Again, in the course I'll be teaching, we'll see this. I don't need to preach to anybody. Literally reading this stuff with an open mind, you'll begin to see that, oh my gosh, ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have bad consequences. Things aren't random, simply how did we get here? It's an important thing about studying the history of ideas, isn't it? So, yes, we inherited these systems that I'm speaking of from Modernity, the Enlightenment Project. These are the global the state and technocratic structures that now dominate us. They subject us to the psychological propaganda of climate change, Coofid, one global and economic citizenry, the undermining of our democratic foundations, right? All of this is psychological propaganda, and it's their visions of the future, the new man and the new polis. And we're told to trust the experts, listen to science, obey, do not question, etc. And here we find, even among the Christian communities, which is a shame, because we should know better, people saying the same things to others and getting quite nasty, actually, about do not question, listen, the no critical analysis. Much of those tactics, ideologies, and technocratic principles that I'm speaking of, you can find, again, already laid out in academic works. Brzezinski, of people who are actually globalists. They believe this, right? They believe in these projects. And they talk about it. Jacques Attali, Carol Quigley, Huxley, John Lilly, Jonas Salks, Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells, and our dear friend from the World Economic Forum, Schwab. Many more too. Okay, so these aren't tabloid, they're academic, they're involved in geopolitics, they know history, they know, the history of ideas, and they believe in something. They're not stupid, silly conspiracy theories. And I'd like to say, to throw around those weaponized slogans, I don't know about you guys, but to me, it simply reveals your academic and intellectual ignorance of certain issues, namely the ones that I'm speaking here. It means you haven't read. Not only that, it proves the point that I'm making. The new Gnostic system creates a language that makes it virtually or practically impossible to question the system. How? You're a conspiracy theorist. End of conversation. No critical analysis. No reflecting. And by the way, science, qua science, has always had the spirit of critical self-analysis and questions. In fact, we have a name for something, as many of you might know, in philosophy of science, Karl Popper, the falsification and the demarcation issue. What makes something a science versus a pseudoscience? So, well, if you can't falsify it according to Karl Popper, and what is he referring to? Interesting enough, Marx and Freud, pawning themselves off as science, but you can't question it. You can never falsify it, right? There's always something else. Well, you said that because you can't question it. You're a conspiracy theorist. Again, that's the Gnostic system that he's talking about. And it's the same thing that was in National Socialism in Russia, Stalin's Soviet Russia, and Freud, Marx, all these different systems. You couldn't actually question it. The system made it impossible. Yet, there was the appeal to science in all of those, an absolutizing of science. That truly was, as Karl Popper says, not science, pseudoscience. So, recall, and Voeglin does, that when the SS officer in Nuremberg, I imagine there were several, right? There wasn't just one, was asked the question, why didn't you refuse to obey orders? The response was, to refuse to obey wasn't even a possibility. Now, it was impossible, according to them, not because the actions were suppressed or one wouldn't even dare to think of refusing to do so, but because the system itself was built in such a way that that reality didn't even exist, making the question possible. Something very similar when, with the fall of the Soviet Union, and translators went over and were trying to translate various things, they found it was particularly difficult, if not impossible, to translate things that into Russian to the people at the time that had anything to do with the concept of individuality. Why? Because it was suppressed? No, the system built it so there was no reality of anything called, or idea of, individuality. The Gnostic system, again, it's impossible. Not because simply it's because it's suppressed. Because the system got rid of that reality. And again, like I said, we see even today some Christians, and sadly even some Orthodox Christians, using this same type of thinking, the same language. What are they saying? Trust the system. Follow, listen, and obey the experts. Work with our leaders and the officials. Despite that neither of these experts, the statesmen, are people that are trustworthy. Nor do they hold anything compatible or even close with Christianity. But yet we're told to worship the science, listen to the experts, and obey these people. The abortion holocaust, the eugenicists, and as we go further, something that is truly a satanic and Luciferian philosophy. These are the people we're told to work with and obey. And some of them maybe even claim to these officials to be Christians. But again, this is why this sort of analysis on a deeper level, a critical analysis of situating these themes historically within both the philosophy of history and political thought, is important. It doesn't matter what somebody says. It matters what's true. There's even some saying, oh, we've got to work. The church has to work. Christians need to work with the officials and their dictates. Don't question that. It's for your own good and your own safety. I'm all for safety. I'm all for the common good. How many atrocities have been committed in the name of safety and common good and health and all these things? All I'm asking, at the very least, be skeptical, be critical, think through this, read, lege tolle, take up and read. They'll even use terms, Orthodox Christians, it's symphonia. The church needs to work with the state on these issues and public health crisis. How can there be a working and trusting of a system that exists that's completely at odds with the Orthodox values and ethos? Furthermore, it's anachronistic to use that word symphonia. I want to... Now, by the way, let me just qualify. I'm not saying be an anarchist, right? I don't think that has place in orthodoxy. I'm not saying rebel, become revolutionaries or something like that. But let's just look at that word. Can we use that word? The church must have symphonia with the state and the experts. I'm just going to make the critique that that's an anachronistic use of the term. I have here, and this might be a good text for any of you to read, but it's the synodal document of the Jubilee Bishops' Council of the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow, August 2000. And it's on guess what? The Orthodox Church and Society, the basis for social concept of the Russian Orthodox Church. I wonder if the bishops and the hierarchs in the synod have something to say about symphonia. The Orthodox tradition has developed an explicit ideal of church-state relations, since church-state relations entail a two-way traffic. The above-mentioned ideal could emerge in history only in a state that recognizes the Orthodox Church is the greatest people's shrine. In other words, only in an Orthodox state. Do we live in an Orthodox state? We live in a multicultural, secular, democratic republic. Okay? Those principles were described as symphony between church and state. It is essentially cooperation, mutual support, and mutual responsibility without one side intruding into the exclusive domain of the other. Okay? The bishops obeys the government as subject. Bishop's not beyond that. But his episcopal power does not come from a government official. Similarly, the government official obeys his bishop as a member of the church who seeks salvation in it, not because his power comes from the power of the bishop. The state, in such a symphonic relationship with the church, seeks for spiritual support, prayer for itself, and blessing upon its work to achieve the goal of its citizens' welfare, while the church enjoys support from the state in creating conditions favorable for preaching and for the spiritual care of her children, who are at the same time citizens of the state. You can't use the word symphonia to describe the Orthodox Church working with state officials in the United States. Those state officials are not members of the Orthodox Church. They don't hold the same values as us. They're not under the bishop spiritually, and they're not working for the same common goals. And do you think, from what you see, they're providing favorable conditions for the church and its citizens to achieve salvation in the liturgy when they're closing down the churches, while allowing porn industry and BLM protests and Antifa and all these different things to occur? You can go do that. You can go gamble. You can commit vice. But God, we've got to shut down Christmas, Thanksgiving, and liturgies. That sounds like symphonia to you? That's insane. I'm sorry, but a shame on anybody using and saying that. May the Lord help you. So, now we know that is not the correct use. Again, we can say the Orthodox Church and the bishops, they work with the state, but don't use the word symphonia. That's not correct. Why? Because clearly no such thing exists in our current situation, and precisely the opposite. So it's wrong, especially once we locate these Gnostic systems and the principles and the technocracy and the values, to say that we need to trust and obey the experts and work with, blindly obey the Gnostic state and the technocratic elite's scientific dictates. So when I'm going to talk about this is the question: where does your trust lie? You know, recall one of my favorite verses, Psalm 27. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Okay, so let me talk a little bit. Are there any questions so far? And then I'm actually going to go into the philosophy of science. I'm going to de-absolutize science and what people have done with science and weaponized it. By the way, let me just give my shout-outs right now to those who subscribed. Thank you. Don't forget, if you have super chats, you can provide it there with your comment. And we have 69 watching. Let's get these numbers up. All right, let's talk a little bit about the philosophy of science. Man, the chat's going pretty fast. Either that or like it's catching up for me. Alrighty. What was that? Another subscriber. Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's talk about why absolutizing science. I mean, listen, obey the science. It's infallible. It's the highest discipline. Why refusing to question science and participating in this Gnostic technocratic system of the new science? It actually, as Voeglin says, it destroys the very nature of science and philosophy. And even if you took a realist or critical realist view of science, there are nevertheless many problems that would make science far from anything we could ever call objective. So why am I bringing this up? Because if you even question it, you're a grammar killer. Like, you don't care, as somebody pointed in there, false dialectics. Okay, of course we care. Of course we're not criticizing individuals and not being sympathetic. The ideas, and especially as clergy, I need to be concerned about this pastorally, because bad ideas, bad practices, bad behaviors hurt people. How is that not sympathetic? Like, what's the, you know what? I want to, one of my favorite verses. So I'll just make sure I got the right verse. Would you open with me to your Bible? 2 Corinthians 10:5. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. What a beautiful verse. As clergy, I'm attacking ideas, arguments, not people. It's because I love people. And anything that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And Gnostic systems, technocracy, liberalism, progressivism, socialism, national socialism, all these different ideas hurt people and set themselves up against the knowledge of God. So I take captive every thought and I make it obedient to Christ because we love. It's okay to be harsh against bad ideas. It comes from a place of love. So, when you're told, again, don't question it, you have to listen, otherwise you don't care for people, you want everybody to die, that's like somebody had mentioned in the chat, that's a false dialectic. That itself should be critiqued. But it's treating, the worst part about it is it's treating science as if it's absolute and entirely objective. Hence, unquestionable. It's like the canons of the ecumenical councils. It's like scripture itself. That's why I said it takes on a religious nature. It's infallible, it's divinized, without God, right? Which is exactly the Nietzschean prediction. Once you kill God from society and remove him, deicide, you replace it. And I believe it was G.K. Chesterton said that, you know, when people stop believing in God, it's not like they stop believing stuff. They'll believe in anything. Something. But the original Luciferian temptation, you will become like God. Which is exactly Lucifer. Here he was beholding, he was the highest creation, beholding the very transcendent ground of all being in order. And what happened? Lucifer began to move his eyes off the transcendent ground of being, God. And he began to look at himself. And he found that he was beautiful. And he was. And he began to develop the narcissism. How great am I? My will be done. I will become God. Lucifer is the original one that commits deicide. I've killed God in my own mind. And I replace myself. And then he hands down the same temptation to man. Why work hard at becoming like God? You can become, you don't need that transcendent. So you notice the Gnostic theme coming over and over. You don't need that. You don't need wisdom. You are God. You can build your own systems, your own epistemology, your own politics, your own science. But once it's divorced from the transcendent ground of being, it's no longer philosophy. It's not love of wisdom. It's love of self. It is not science. Science is only knowledge in virtue of its connection and desire and love of the transcendent ground of being, God. So it's Luciferian. It's satanic. It's the worship of self. And the absolutizing, it's making an idol. That's why I said science-dolatry, which is really the worship of oneself. But again, even if you say, well, you know what, I have a realist view of science, or maybe a critical realist, and I'll talk about what that means in a little bit. Science is far from anything objective. Why? First, science operates on the lowest form of reasoning, inductive reasoning, which means there can never be established any universal or truly law-like propositions or claims about the natural world. This is one among many reasons why science is constantly changing. Okay, so again, when I'm going through this, think about the science idolaters who are actually saying you can't doubt the science. That's what science says. You can't, this is what works. Really, but all of science is based on inductive reasoning. Here's an example. I have the hypothesis, all swans are white, and I go through a sample of 1 million different swans and confirm my hypothesis, and tomorrow find a black swan. Second, science constantly suffers from the problems surrounding causation. Guess what? Causation being one of those things necessary for science, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to establish causal relations. Why? Because correlation does not equal causation. And we see this in the history of science, philosophy of science, occurring over and over again. And this difficulty is only further compounded when we consider Hume's problem of induction and his arguments that causation is something that can't be derived from sense experience or observations about the natural world. Yeah, sense experience and observations about the natural world is another one of those things that's for science. Third, we have the problem with values, biases, agendas, funding, ideologies that are always intrinsically involved in science and scientific research that make any objectivity within science nearly impossible. And even if those weren't the devastating problems mentioned above, scientists don't fund their own projects, assuming scientists themselves could work apart from their own biases, their own worldviews, their own subjective intentions. We'd still be left with the bias and agenda issues of funding, publication, censorship, dissemination that keeps science far from objectivity. Now, all you have to do is do any little research into corporations, tech companies, Bill and Melinda Gates, right? This is why it's important to situate this within ideological paradigms, right? Things don't just exist as fact. You don't just look at the evidence and the facts, right? The facts are all colored and contaminated by people's theories, commitments, biases, and agendas, and money. So look, follow the money. Corporations, tech companies, foundations, banks, endowments, Rockefeller Institute, right? What's the other one that I was thinking? Oh, I'll remember it when I don't need it. They prevent other scientific studies all the time from being published. And then when you look into, again, those corporations, those tech companies, the foundations, the endowments, the banks, and various organizations that actually do the funding for scientific research, well, guess what? They're committed less to science, qua science, and more to the philosophical ideas that I'm talking about, and agendas that are always at odds with our Christian beliefs. That doesn't bother you? That doesn't give you pause for concern? And then furthermore, there are countless examples of top research and publications admitting to fraudulent findings and publications. One recent example is the editor of Lancet Journal, the most respected peer-reviewed medical journal, actually, Richard Horto, admitting in 2015 that, quote, much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply not be true. Afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analysis, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance, science has taken a turn towards darkness, end quote. John Ioannidis, one of the world's leading experts on medical research, adds to this, stating that 90% of medical research is tainted if not outright bogus due to the influence of the industry. Dr. Marcia Angel, I forget how you pronounce, a physician and longtime editor-in-chief of the New England Medical Journal, NEMJ, considered also to be one of the most prestigious peer-reviewed medical journals in the world, also comments saying, quote, "It's simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I've reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as editor of the New England Journal of Medicine," end quote. These fears were all recently confirmed again when Lancet had to retract many of its publications on Coofid due to them being fraudulent. And just on those findings alone, we should be extremely hesitant to make any claims about Coofid, especially because it was totally politicized. You saw that. And that was one of the things that kind of started this process too. I found it really interesting. Why is it that people on the left and liberals were the ones doing all the virtue signaling, saying science, like wearing the mask on their profile pictures as if you can get the virus through the computer? Not that kind of virus. You can't get. Trust that. Who was the most vocal? Who was? And then I was interested. Well, on the other side, like Republicans and conservatives, you still had that, but you had much larger kind of skepticism. At first glance, I was thinking, well, that's probably because liberals and the left are more kind of egalitarian, and it's kind of what they're saying, like, we gotta care for people, and we gotta play it safe and listen to the science, and I mean, we don't want to kill people, right? And conservatives and Republicans are like, I'll be danged if you step on my freedom. I'm my individual rights. So I thought it was maybe an issue of kind of egalitarianism versus radical kind of individualism and rights and stuff like that. And after reading Voeglin and a lot of the works, I started to realize, no, that's not it. It's because the left is involved in a paradigm of progressivism, a Gnostic paradigm. They buy into this system. That's why I said, after reading this and thinking through, I don't know how anybody could think that those systems are compatible with Christianity. So the other thing you have to think about too is that the science from the experts on the Coofid is all over the place. It's constantly changing. The goalposts are constantly moving out. They're constantly, right, this works, this doesn't, these are the things that you need to do. Okay, nothing's working. The numbers aren't going down. And in light of that, and everything that I said here about how science actually works, without even considering the cries, the things I just mentioned, you should be extremely suspicious. Certainly, you should stay away from any claims that the science is true or approaches anywhere near objectivity. Again, you can be a scientist. You could have a PhD in science. This is the philosophy of science. And if you don't allow us to critique the science and analyze it, to test it, it's not scientist, and you're not a scientist, and you're participating in the Gnostic beast system. I don't know how else to say it. That's my point. Do not absolutize and make an idol out of science. Now, let me step into my personal, tell you how you personally feel. about science, why I think naive realism or the critical realist positions on science. Well, what is that? The naive realist position is that science actually describes real entities. So when we talk about the atom or the virus, that's actually the way it looks out there in the world. So we're talking about ontology. Or perhaps a critical realist, like, okay, I don't think there's actually like a nucleus and, electron and stuff like that. But I believe that science describes a real ontology of the structures of the natural world. And then one can approach those in varying degrees. Why do I think that's incorrect is what we're going to talk about now. Now, by the way, this is a good book. This has a lot of kind of the essential philosophy of science readings. Some of them are like extremely, extremely difficult, like Bayesian probability theory and stuff like that. But one thing that's a good article in here is, you've got Quine, Two Dogmas of Empiricism. You got Thomas Kuhn's The Structures of Scientific Revolution. Well, let's pick up there. If we read Thomas Kuhn's The Structures of Scientific Revolution, we find that the history of science, it doesn't proceed by accumulating. We just get more and more evidence and confirm or then readjust our theories. Okay, why am I bringing that up? Because this is what people are saying. Well, we're just mistaken about that. We just correct it as we go along. Then we confirm new theories. All you have to think about is the Ptolemaic geocentric paradigm or theory versus the heliocentric from Copernicus and Tycho Brahe. If you ask most people, like, well, we definitely know we live in a heliocentric. I mean, how did we go from one paradigm to another? And everybody's going to tell you, we just got more and more evidence. We just accumulated and we adjusted and got the more accurate view of the world. And they were able to confirm, hence with objectivity and certainty, that it's heliocentric. That's not how science works. It doesn't accumulate evidence like that. Rather, as Thomas Kuhn points out, it assumes the theory. It always starts by assuming the paradigm or overall theory such that what you would call evidence now becomes paradigm relative. And that evidence incommensurate with the other scientific paradigms or theories. This goes into, the stuff I work with epistemology. People are like, well, I just saw that if I could see the evidence. Where's the evidence, right? This is this pretended universality and neutrality of these like words. That evidence can just stand on its own. Evidence is only evidence and looks the way it does relative to the person in their paradigm. This is why you see the problems where like person's like, wow, the sun sets evidence of God's existence, and the atheist says it's not. Well, how is that possible? Because the evidence is theory contaminated, it's paradigm contaminated. So you don't start with the evidence and then confirm the paradigm and theory, as the history of science reveals, and as Thomas Kuhn's talked about. The paradigm or the theory is assumed first. And again, why switch paradigm? Not based on the evidence, but something, as Thomas Kuhn describes, as akin to a revolution, a coup d'etat. Out with the old and in with the new. That's how the history of science. Now, there might be reasons, but they're not based on truth or ontology or evidence. I'm not going to get into it. Gets further into kind of the philosophy of science. Second, the incommensurateness of scientific paradigms, which even includes current accepted scientific paradigms today, is something that not only Kuhn realized, but Wilfred van Orman Quine, in his work, as I mentioned, in his two dogmas of empiricism, he was able to demonstrate we're simply unable to derive our science or confirm any scientific theory or paradigm from the data, from the sense experience. Okay, now you see how this is relevant to the Coofid and all the claims. You have a theory. Is it immunity? Is this how you cannot confirm that from or demonstrate that from the data or the observations. He and Duhem, in what's called the Quine-Duhem theory of the underdetermination of data thesis, revealed that our data, our sense experience and observations, can all fit and support multiple conflicting scientific theories or paradigms. That is to say that the evidence, the available evidence at any given time, will be insufficient for determining what theory or beliefs we should adopt. Therefore, the science is indeed undetermined by evidence and data. Do you think that scientists in the lab actually think about and read Kuhn and Quine and Duhem? No. Furthermore, it reveals that if there's multiple scientific theories and they're all conflicting with each other, and by the way, they can all work, like pragmatically. You can actually do stuff, and they all fit the evidence and the data. Well, ask yourself, can they all be true? If they're all saying reality looks fundamentally different, in fact, this way, it looks that way, right? They all can work and do stuff. You can build stuff, right? You can still use the Ptolemaic geocentric universe model to navigate. You can predict where the star, it still works. We're talking about true. If you have multiple theories and paradigms that all fit the data and they're contradicting each other, can they all be true about what reality actually fundamentally is, or describing the structures? This is what leads, among other things, philosophers of science like myself to reject scientific realism in favor of either anti-realism or metaphysical quietism or instrumentalism. So we have people like Quine, Duhem, Loudon, Putnam, Fine, Fairbairn, Dewey, etc., et al. They're all in that camp. What's the camp? The camp that thinks that science is not metaphysics or ontology. Rather than thinking, for example, that each statement, the atom has a nucleus, maps onto reality in a one-to-one correspondence, like a naive realist or a verificationist view. Quine, when you read him, suggests that our statements like that about the external world, they face a tribunal of sense experience, not individually. So it's like there's an atom and it has a nucleus, and that's true because there's an atom, the sense experience hits and verifies that statement. There's an atom that has a nucleus. Quine says it doesn't work like that. Your sensation and all the data, sense experience, doesn't hit individually, but as a corporate body. In other words, statements only have their meaning within the greater fabric and web of beliefs and language structures, i.e. paradigms. In fact, Quine says it's better to think of the entity's properties, laws, etc., like atoms, electrons, to be something like mythological characters. We posit them to serve some functional purpose within the overall general story, the scientific paradigm. And he says it's not devoid from reality. The scientific paradigm impinges upon reality at the edges, but it's not this one-to-one naive realist verificationalist. There is an actual atom like that. The atom's a mythological character, dude, like, is basically what he's saying. The story works and the things have their meaning in a whole. Dependent, right? It's the paradigm first. Okay. Now, all of this points, to me at least, of science being a praxis proesis. What's that? Those are the Greek words for knowledge concerned with doing, making, applied knowledge, rather than like the Greek word theoria, a knowledge for knowledge's sake, or knowledge about ontology or metaphysics. And this is why I'm personally more inclined to move science out of the absolutization, right? Out of the category of ontological, the ontological metaphysical sphere, and commit myself to a metaphysical quietism. It might be like I'm just going to be quiet about. In fact, I prefer something called instrumentalism. Why? Because science is concerned. It's a knowledge concerned with doing and making, like a tool. Techne, the Greek word, the tool of the artisan, and it shouldn't be concerned with describing reality, ontology, or metaphysics, which today, what do you see? That's exactly what you, from, what's the physicist, the popular atheist physicist, treating these things they're into scientism, they're Scientologists, that absolutely describes reality. They're doing metaphysics, so they're not doing science. Again, I don't go into my toolbox and expect, my screwdriver is going to tell me about the metaphysics of the world or the ontological structures of reality. Screwdrivers are tools. And although they have something to do with reality, what they really have to do with and what they're concerned with is producing, accomplishing the goal, not giving me a metaphysical commentary. Likewise, it's my personal opinion, we should view science the same way. It's a tool for making, doing, producing, etc. So you see, I'm not anti-science, right? Within its proper context and understanding, and out of the realm of Gnosticism and these technocratic nightmares that we're dealing with. So science is a tool for making and doing. It's not in the category of ontology and metaphysics. Scientific theories, facts, laws are no more on this position true or describe reality than screwdrivers or hammers. So in light of this, what does it mean to be told to trust the experts? Remember, the experts are now the high priests, the metaphysicians, the philosophers. But philosophy and metaphysics has been destroyed. It's now man-made Gnostic speculation. Science takes the appearance of science, but it's not actually science. It's bastardized. And the best things, what's the optima corrupta pessima, the Augustine line, the best things corrupted become the worst. Ideas have consequences, bad ideas have bad consequences on all of us. And so, again, through the problems of bias, the problems of induction, the funding, the ideologies that fund these things, the Gnostic technocratic ideologies that are funding all of science in this new world order, right? This kind of globalism that Klaus Schwab is talking about, and the academic elites, Brzezinski, Adelaide, and et al. That I was speaking about, given their influence on science, given the things of the medical experts, how can we trust? But let's just pause for a second. What does it mean for an Orthodox Christian to trust? Well, the way that we trust, and this is Orthodox Epistemology 101, is that I trust somebody, we trust people when we enter into a life with them, when we're in communion with them. What does a communion mean? To hold all things in common. Same beliefs, same practices, right? And you develop a life. This is what God's invitation is to us. Come make a relationship with me. Enter and hold the same things common with me. That's how I trust people. I can vouch for people. I know this person. Why? Because we hold the same views. What is the world telling you? Just the opposite. Celebrate diversity. What does that even mean? God says, I wish you were all one, even as the Father and I are one, Christ says. Does he say, I wish you all had conflicting paradigms and worldviews? And you know what? Let's create a whole politics of multiculturalism where all of you can enter in and all be divided, but united in your dividedness, right? Do you see that these things are meaningless terms? And by the way, and I don't mean multi-ethnic, I mean multicultural. Culture is much deeper than ethnicity. When you have a multicultural society, what happens when one culture, and you're seeing this happen today, both through the elections, through religions, through the Coofid, what happens when my culture says it's wrong to do this, and the other culture says, no, it's right, you have an obligation, or you should. Somebody's going to have to compromise their fundamental beliefs. That's not good. Multiculturalism is not a good thing. And then I guess here they'll say, well, you just duke it out in the voting booths. You just all agree that you have to disagree. And some of you are going to have to sacrifice your fundamental religion's values and principles. Why? For unity. For the common good, you're going to have to set aside for public health, right? You're going to have to set aside. Now think about this. It's not the lack of compassion. I mean, we have I just read an article, let me see if I can put it up. Over 80 million Americans that slipped into poverty. We have an economy that's crashed. Okay. There's homeless. People are never going to get their businesses. Unemployed. Suicide and mental health issues have skyrocketed. All for a virus that, what is it, less than 0.5% mortality rate, and the mortality rate, I think it's actually less than that. I have the statistics up here. Of those infected, and that mortality is due to morbid other complications that aren't not the virus itself. So remember the dichotomy. I have friends who have died, right? We just lost, God rest his soul, His Holiness Patriarch Irenae to Coofid. I know people die from I'm not naive about. I need some profound scientific theory to know. Okay. But people pit against the false dichotomy, right? And by the way, the Marxist and Gnostic systems are notorious for the dialectics here. Well, you're either a lover of mankind and compassionate, or you're a selfish SOB who's only concerned about the economy and themselves because you just want a job, right? Like, really? Is it worth it? We should all be asking this question. So, despite that science is far removed from anything objective, despite the corruption of science, and despite that even with the Coofid, and by the experts' own admission, basically we're wrong. We're wrong about this, right? We're wrong about, but we're working on it, right? Well, we'll get there. And all the restrictions and mandates that have been handed down have done nothing to curb the numbers. We have studies now that that the masks aren't working, right? None of this stuff that they're saying you have to do is working, but they always like, well, you got to just be safe. You don't want people to die, right? Well, it's already in the false dialectic. Okay, suppose 3 people were going to die. Suppose that was actually the number. I mean, God forbid, like nobody wants dead. Would you say it would be worth for 80 million people to go into poverty, much of them no longer have homes, to now suffer depression, suicide? Now we got maybe more deaths and problems arising. Okay? Those sorts of drastic measures require extraordinary evidence and standards. Okay, but you're not allowed to question it. That's the Gnostic system that I'm talking about. And so this really does come from a place of compassion. Also, I'd like to say again, in light of, well, how do we Orthodox know so that we enter a common life? That's how we trust. Well, it's just like, what evidence do you have to trust the experts and the officials and the statesmen? Let's just go over a couple. Let's just do a little history review. Do these people, let's play a game. Do these people feel trustworthy? If you had a friend that constantly lied to you, constantly did bad things, would you trust them? The United States actually secretly tested chemical and biological weapons on American soil in the 1960s. Pentagon reports that. What did they do? Our own government, our own officials, the medical experts, they sprayed deadly nerve agents in Alaska. They sprayed bacteria over citizens in Hawaii. This is all released from the Pentagon. Find this. They also tested nerve agents in Canada and Britain, and biological and chemical weapons in 2 other states, Maryland, Florida. Now, let me pull up another piece of history. In 1950, the U.S. released a bioweapon in San Francisco. See, what's funny is that people are going to be like, you're concerned. Again, what does this show? It shows that people are either willfully ignorant, malicious, and divisive, or it just simply reveals you're uneducated. And I'm not saying everything under the term conspiracy theory is true, right? But it's a weaponized word. It was created that way. There are conspiracies. Okay, it's in the Bible. It's called geopolitics. Do you think that the State Department, corporation, you think they go, you know what we should do? We should make all this information privy to everybody. But just let's look back at the history of, in 1950, the bioweapon being sprayed in San Francisco. Beginning on September 26, 1950, a crew of U.S. Navy minesweeping ships spent 6 days spraying Serratia marcescens into the air that blew 2 miles off the northern California coast. And guess what it was called? The project was called Operation Sea Spray. Oh. And what was the purpose of it? Well, let's just determine the susceptibility of a big city like San Francisco to a bioweapon by terrorists. What we're going to use? Let's use our own citizens. At the time, it was thought to actually be harmless to humans. But turns out it's not. We had several people actually die from it. Is it frozen? Can you guys hear me? Let's see if I come back. Oh, I'm showing I'm good on my... Do I guys look frozen to you? Okay, let's... Am I still frozen? Why don't you guys write me in the chat? See what you can see. I'll make sure it's not mine. On mine, it's showing... Is it your computer? Let me see. Huh. I'm like, look at my face. That's a funny. Yeah, I don't know what. Should I try? Oh, did I move? It might be my CPU. Skip frames. Dang it. Am I back? Yeah, the audio's fine. Let's just see. Okay, video's working. Okay, where were we? The syphilis experiment in Guatemala, also known... Uh-oh. I'll try to pull this article from the New York Times. Oh, it wants me to subscribe. Nope. The CIA's involvement. So obviously the syphilis experiment, obviously, and people in Guatemala were injected with syphilis. The Trotsky experiment. Why is this not working? Let's see, 1963 to 1966. Trying to get some more. The Tuskegee experiment. Dr. Cutler died in 2003, actually trying to defend that project. We have Agent Orange. We have the CIA MK Ultra. The use of drugs and within hospitals too. I mean, I could go. There's a whole list of also the mosquitoes in Florida that were released with malaria. So my question, so returning back to trust, these are the people you trust. So let's just boil this back down again. There is no symphonia. People are not Orthodox. They're not under a bishop. They're not working for the common goals for the Orthodox Church. These people are either believe in it themselves or participate in the technocratic Gnostic beast system that doesn't hold any of our Christian values. And that's one that's concerned with domination and control, not the betterment of humanity, but this idea of, one world. I mean, look what, no private property, right? All just one world, economic polis, one religion. Now, that does not sound. And then look at the history of the experts we're supposed to. So what did we look at? We looked at the nature of science. We looked at the kind of modern Gnostic thought, both politically and ideologically, in which we live in, which is now identified as technocracy. And they're all saying the same thing. It's all the same people. We've seen the recent history, even in the United States, of the CIA and state officials. Am I crazy to say, we might have a problem trusting? I don't share a life with them. I don't share the same values and they're worse than a bad friend, who I would at least know. I don't know these people. All I do know is that they have a terrible history of. So anyways, that's it for, I don't want to keep you guys. Let's see if we have, those are kind of my thoughts. Again, I just wrote out some thoughts a couple hours last night. I just kind of sat down and wrote these things out. I think I'm going to continue to work on these and reflect on these ideas because I care for people. I care about teaching the truth and destroying arguments that set themselves up against the knowledge of God and taking captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ, because I have compassion, and I don't want to participate in the beast system. I think that there's ways that we can be precautious with flus, with Coofid, right? There's responsible things, but we've got to realize, we got to be able to question this stuff, and officials and these things, especially when they're shutting down our churches and doing these different things. They can't, you can't do that. And nobody should be required to, or ask the hierarchs to participate in that type of Sergianism. And that's what it seems like. It's not, doesn't look like Symphonia. It looks like Sergianism, right? That would be my question. What do you think the difference is there? Why couldn't we say that? Why couldn't we say all the same things? Yeah, ask yourself that. Put yourself either in Nazi Germany or Stalin's Russia, and everything that's being said right now about Coofid and the restrictions under the dictates of science. Ask yourself, would I be the type of person that would be saying the same things that I'm saying today that I would then? You know, introspect a little bit. Would I say cooperate? Would I say that Symphonia? And you always say, well, the persecution was so much more obvious. Really? That's insulting to people. So there's just fundamentally something wrong with German and Russian people that I mean, it was just so obvious, and there's all these people just decided to participate. And remember what the Gnostic systems, those realities are created so they don't even exist. The questions, the refusal to, how do you know you're not in the same thing? Would you say the same thing? Shouldn't you be able to question it? Shouldn't you be able to? Where does your trust lie? Mine lies in the Lord. So with that, let's take any questions you guys have. Super chats, let's see. No super chats tonight, I don't think. Let me see. Yes. Awesome. We got one super chat. Rose Steaks donated $10. Father, how do we reconcile the atrocities and lies this government, both at the local and national level, have done with our duty to be obedient to authority, and that all authority is given by God? Great question. Thank you so much. So, and this is the kind of question about law. Again, we're not anarchists. We're not Marxist rebels. But human law is only law in as much as it derives and reflects divine law. This is going back to the same question of when is science science? Only when it's connected to its transcendent grounds of being, which is God himself. Philosophy is only philosophy, the love of wisdom, when in recognizing the intelligible order, you recognize it in light, and because of that, because of the transcendent ground of being, who is God himself, whose divine energies are shot through the intelligible world of being that makes it intelligible. So likewise with law, if there are laws that are clearly and dictates against divine law, it's no law at all. If it doesn't derive from, so I hope that answered that question there. So all authority that is authority is given by God. But their authority and the laws are only authority inasmuch as they derive from the divine law. So if they're contradicting, you're not bound by something that's not law just because somebody says it is. So that's the principle. I mean, of course, there might be more obscure cases that you have to think through, but that's what the principle is there. Yeah, Finn, there's some other reasons. We had some people that have actually been in the military that Orthodox Christians that warn, there's nothing wrong serving in the military and being patriotic about your nation. That's a good thing. And we have warrior saints. But it was really interesting because some Orthodox veterans were saying, you don't want to go into the military now. You'll have to go through like the LGBT sensitive training, all this different stuff. You'll be given all kinds of stabbies. And that's a good question. Like, what are you actually fighting for? What is it that you're being patriotic about? Because most that come out, they say all their friends now have mental health, serious mental health problem, PTSD. The suicide rates are off the wall. So those are things to think about. I suggest. I'm not a veteran myself, and again, there's nothing wrong. It's wonderful to be patriotic and serve in the military. But I'd say those are things to consider. Like, where are we at? What is the military like now? And I think the best way for an Orthodox Christian, go talk to an Orthodox Christian that's a vet. They would be the best to talk to about that. Let's see. Going back. Okay, this is the part where I was frozen. Yeah, so patriarch, Erne. So again, both the age and comorbidity as the... So I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm being unreasonable here in thinking these things out. Any other questions? Well, what we could do, I would like to end with a prayer for those who are ill. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever to ages of ages. Amen. Almighty Lord, physician of souls and bodies, we humbly lift up, who reprimand and again heal. Visit your servants who are sick, who have the Coofid, who have other illnesses and sicknesses. Heal them with your mercy, for we know that many are suffering. Stretch forth your arm, which is so full of healing and health, and cure them. Raise them up from their beds in pain. Remove the spirit of weakness which is in them. and draw far from them pain, wounds, chills, fever, and weakness. If they have any sins or transgressions, loosen, remit, and forgive them. In your love for mankind, O Lord, have compassion on your creation. In Christ Jesus our Lord, in whom you are blessed, together with your all-holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and ever, until the ages of ages. Amen. We also pray for the recently departed, the hierarchs, and His Holiness Patriarch Irenae. O good Lord, remember your servants, and forgive them in which they have transgressed in their lives. For only you are without sin and can grant rest to the departed. In your divine wisdom and love for mankind, you bestow all things and provide for all the needs of man. O Creator, rest the souls of your servants who have placed their hope in you, O Lord, the fashioner and creator of all and our God. Among the saints, O Christ, rest the souls of your servants, where there is neither pain, nor grief, nor sighing, but everlasting life. Memory eternal, through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy upon us. Amen. Right before I leave, let me just double check, make sure that any other super chats. Wow. God bless you guys. Yeah, Del Noche, thank you. The replacement of the idea of Homo sapiens, who is characterized by his participation in the Logos, by the idea of Homo faber, like making an image unto the beast. Christopher Olson, thank you. In fact, I'd like to after I read the rest of them, there was another quote that by Del Noce. In his judgment, the affluent society is intrinsically totalitarian and anti-traditional because its underlying philosophy is a form of radical positivism that recognizes the empirical sciences as the only valid form of knowledge. Historically, it is the only possible bourgeois and secular answer to Marxism, and arises because of its intrinsic contradiction within Marxism itself. It defeats Marxism in the sense that it appropriates all its negations of transcendent values by pushing to the limit the aspects of Marxism that makes it a form of absolute relativism. This has the result of turning Marxism upside down into an absolute individualism, which serves the purpose of giving the technological civilization the false appearance of being a democracy. Are we not seeing this right now with the elections? And the Constitution, the spirit of liberalism. Precisely because it fails to criticize Marx's metaphysical negations, Del Noce considers progressives incapable of resisting the growing dehumanization of the technological society. Well done. From the crisis of modernity, Del Noce perfectly describing the historical process that has led up to our technocracy and scientism. Other super chats. And Christopher Olson, thank you so much. $50. Wonderful. I can get my Coofid test now. Well, I'm not going to put myself on a list. By the way, I actually think I had it and I got over it, so. Thoughts of a Pilgrim donated $5. Thank you. Thoughts of Pilgrim says, thank you for all you do, Father Deacon. What should one do if one has tried to speak to his priest about it, but could not get through? Should he consider looking into another church, or should he try and stick it out? I actually was thinking about this the other night. Again, this is discernment. It's a really hard spiritual gift, maybe the hardest to. I'm having to constantly assess, and I constantly blow it. Is this the hill I want to die on? Is this the argument I want to make, right? And I want to make it now. Do I want to open my mouth? I'm constantly wrong about that. That's because I'm a terrible sinner, and I'm not too advanced in my spiritual asceticism. But So that's going to be something that you need to really like. Do I need to say that? Does it need to be said now? You know, the monks had something that they practiced, kind of like a 10-second rule. You know, wait 10 seconds before you say something. So they just kind of slows it down. And then number two, ask yourself, what's my intended goal in saying or doing something? Then you realize what the goal is. Then ask yourself the second question, if I say or do this, will it help me accomplish it? My goal. And if you find yourself saying no, then don't do it. Okay, there might be other ways. Typically, one person saying something doesn't, you know, it's easy for a person to brush off. I mean, even, you know, priests are sinners too. We clergy. And, however, I had thought about, you know, if enough of you got together, if you had a petition where you signed and said enough's enough, something has to be done. Something has to be said. We have to have courage, and at some point stand up. And maybe not everybody in the parish feels this way, but a large percentage that have signed here, and everyone signed here, we believe this. We're your flock. We feel this way, and just put it back on the. What do you do, Father? How do you look after your flock who are, you know, suffering themselves? And that might be a way to deal with it. It might be a way to do it even with the bishops too, because it's much more difficult to brush off when you have a large amount of people going, this enough's enough. You can't have strip clubs open, technocratic statesmen and tech companies, and gambling, and pro-BLM protests and Antifa and people burning down cities and stuff like that, all being sanctioned and allowed while closing down the churches. And again, certainly with no evidence, none of the dictates that they have handed out have done anything, haven't changed. That's why it's very obvious it's not about the science, it's about technocracy, it's about control. And so every new thing that's implemented, right? Track racing, can't travel, right? I mean, it's all laid out in the academic globalist books. You have to be willfully ignorant to ignore that stuff. And because nothing's changing, things aren't getting better, it's a perfect opportunity to say, these people can't be trusted. They don't know what they're doing. Furthermore, they're a system of the beast. They don't, they want the will to power and dominate, like, not better. And if I think enough of you, and we had a petition, enough of that went out to, like, enough people signed that, and it went to the parishes and priests and the bishops, said enough's enough. We don't, that can't be ignored. So I thought about that the other night. That might be something to. Fisherman donates $3. Please bless me and chat. Father, I am a sinner. God bless us all and help us sinners. Yes. My prayers for you. And thank you. Any other questions before we depart in peace? $56. What do we have up to 62?